One of the top running backs in the transfer portal has committed to the University of Utah, and Keanu Tanuvasa, one of the best defensive players on Utah's roster, is now in the transfer portal. We're breaking down what it all means on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. If it's your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments, as well as on social media. We can follow our show at Locked On Utes on X. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On, all caps, no spaces, for $20 off your first purchase. To get Game Time, you can head over today. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. On today's show, we have a lot to get to. The Keanu Tanavasa news is the biggest thing recently. It broke yesterday, and we got to get to that. But I did want to start with some positivity and something that I've been really wanting to talk about, but just because of this constant news cycle, I haven't had the chance to. And that is the fact that Utah landed one of the consensus top running backs in the transfer portal in Wayshawn Parker. He was a true freshman last year at Washington State and had a ton of success there. And he was as high as second. I might have even seen one site rank him first, but either way, like everywhere you look, this is a top 5 transfer running back, and Utah was able to bring him to Salt Lake City. So this is a massive get. Utah hired his former running back coach, Mark Atuai. So bringing him in, you thought, okay, Utah's probably the front runner for Parker. He had visits lined up to UNLV, USC, UCLA, Arizona and Utah. It came down to Arizona and Utah, and he ends up coming to Utah. And this is massive. I mean, Utah is completely revamping their offense. We're going to get to some of the other running back departures and things that Utah's had. But Parker, he was a beast last year. You look at what the Sacramento, California native did. He was a 6 foot, just barely under 200-pound back at 199. He had 137 carries, 735 yards, 4 touchdowns, while averaging 5.4 yards per carry. This is simply running back one. Last year in Jason Beck's offense, he had 2 players, Dampier as well as his other back, Eli Sanders, I believe it was, both went over 1,000 yards. I think Parker as well as Dampier have a great chance to do exactly that in Salt Lake City. Parker's was incredibly impressive last season when you look at what he did. His best game was against Utah State. He had 11 carries for 149 yards. Yes, that's right. 2 touchdowns in that game too. But just really over the course of the season, kind of continued to get a pretty steady workload and always impressed. And there were times where, yes, he looked like his final game, only 14 carries for 45 yards, but in almost every game, he averaged over 3 yards per carry. He's going to be behind an even better offensive line. We always talk about the freshman to sophomore leap on this show. I think he's a great back. When you go back and watch his film, he's got good quickness. He's got good vision, too. The jump cuts are something that stands out. That's shiftiness in space, the speed to break away, and he is a 3-down back, which I think is something that's incredibly important. Wayshawn Parker is a monster get for the University of Utah. This offense should be on a total another planet than what it was from a season ago because of the ability of guys like Parker, and his skill set paired with what Dampier does is going to be incredibly exciting. I'm really looking forward to seeing what Parker's going to do in Salt Lake City. Really like his game and what he brings to the table. But he's not the only running back that Utah added recently, as they also added NaQuari Rogers. Rogers comes over from New Mexico. That's right, Jason Beck's former school. He brings on one of his old Lobos backs, the junior, 5'11", 208 pounds, had 74 carries last year for 328 yards, 5 touchdowns, and also averaged 5.2 yards per carry. He's another guy where, when given the opportunities, he really excelled. I mean, you look at the game he had against New Mexico State. He had 21 carries for 122 yards in that game. And then even the last game of the season, they gave him 15 carries. He had 83 yards. That's 5 yards per carry. When given a large workload, he produced. So this is another guy. He's a really quality back that had 382 yards last year. I think there's a really good chance he goes even over that because he's going to have an even larger role, I feel like. And yes, obviously we saw last year, even as the backup, that's what he got. But I just feel like this is going to be a Utah backfield that, even though I expect Parker to be the guy, I expect Rogers to get a fair amount of carries in Salt Lake City. So this is another addition I'm excited about. Another player who provides just good speed, quickness, and he's going to be a guy who's going to be an impact player right away. So the Utah backfield looks completely different, and Utah didn't stop there. So I do think Parker's going to be running back 1. I do expect RB2 to be Rodgers, as he was last year for the Lobos. When you look at the consistent level of playing, of just ability that he brings, he is a more of a first and second down back. He only had 3 catches for 14 yards. Doesn't mean he can't be more of a receiving back, but this will be a senior season. We've kind of got a pretty good idea of what he is at this point. And he's a guy who's kind of always had that, always been under 500 yards, but always had above 300 yards throughout his college career. So that is something that excites me for what he can come over and do at Salt Lake City. Really like what Rodgers brings in a legit backup running back. So you feel good about the top 2 guys. And who's going to be RB3? Well, a guy who will be vying for that spot is going to be Devin Green, the UNLV transfer, also committed to Salt Lake City. The 6-foot freshman back, 210 pounds, had 29 carries last year for 123 yards, a touchdown, and 4.2 yards per carry. Didn't see a ton of run, but when given opportunities, I mean, look at the game against like the Utah Tech. He had 6 carries for 61 yards, and that's good for 10 yards carry and a touchdown too. That was his lone touchdown of the year. Now, didn't get a ton of opportunities after that, but what is he? A freshman. So once again, you look at the freshman to sophomore leap, and he was also in a good UNLV team. So the fact that he was even like a guy who got some carries his freshman year, that makes me excited. This to me is a clear third back. Parker, the clear starter for what he did his freshman year. Rodgers, very productive there. And then you get a guy like Green, who will also be competing with some of the other, Utah's brought in some talented freshmen, and we'll see who else they bring on too. But if you're like, okay, Green's your third back, I like that because I feel like this is a guy who has the upside to be even better than that, which is obviously something that excites me. So this is the running back room that Mark Atuai, Utah's new running back coach, has built, and I like it a lot. I do think it's an upgrade over last year's running back room. I think when you look at the likes of guys like, yes, Mekhi Bernard was RB1, but after that, there was a drop off. We never got to see Anthony Woods due to the injury. I like Mike Mitchell. We'll talk about him more in the last segment, as he was also another guy who headed to the transfer portal. He was solid. And then Jalen Glover too, but there was such a clear drop off when Mekhi wasn't in the game. And while I think Parker's the best guy, I think Rodgers is going to do a really good job of holding down the fort whenever he's not on there. I think this is going to be a well-rounded Utah backfield where you have a clear number 1, you have a clear number 2, clear number 3, but all those guys capable of coming in and producing. When you have an offensive line that all 5 starters return, does that mean all 5 starters should be starting? That's something I disagree with. But most of those guys are going to be, I expect 4 of the 5 guys at least to be starters again next year, or at least 3 of the 5. But the tackles of Spencer Fano and Caleb Lomu, that's pretty much all you need to say for like, can you get outside runs going? Absolutely. Those are 2 of the best tackles in all of college football, and they're on the same team returning. So really excited about the future of the Utah run game. The run game is massively important to Jason Beck's offense, and him and Mark Atuai did a great job of getting some talented backs, with Parker, the number 2 ranked back in 24/7 Sports' ranking, now coming to Salt Lake City. This is the biggest commit Utah's gotten yet from a recruiting standpoint. Yes, obviously quarterback position more important, but when you look at what Parker has did last year at Washington State, one of the best offenses in college football, what the Cougars had going. It's why everyone from their offense is now at Oklahoma, and you see a guy like Parker lands himself at Utah. So Parker ready to get back to playing power, or for the first time playing Power 4 football, but was easily good enough to do so his freshman year. Now gets the opportunity in Salt Lake City. Can't wait to see what he brings. Can't wait to watch Rodgers get to work. And I also think Devin Green was a really nice pickup for Utah out of the transfer portal. So that does it for the running back room, at least for now. Like we said, we'll talk about something at the very end. And we got to get to some massive news in a moment that Utah defensive tackle Keanu Tanavasa will be entering the transfer portal. Was absolutely shocked to wake up to this news earlier this morning. Going to talk about my reaction to it, as well as just break down what it means, because it is very concerning. This is the biggest loss that Utah has felt yet, and we are going to be discussing why that is in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. It's thrilling. Not only can you bet on who will win the game, but FanDuel also has bets for which player will score a touchdown, how many points each team will score, and so much more. I got my eyes set on the Christmas Day games. I cannot wait to see them play out on Netflix, and FanDuel has you covered there. Do you think the Chiefs are going to get one step closer to locking up the 1 seed, and are they going to be able to defeat the Steelers? Then Ravens-Texans, a fun matchup too, seeing Lamar Jackson take on C.J. Stroud, as well as the rest of the NFL slate. And it's not just that. We get all the NBA games on Christmas. As a Timberwolves fan, I'm fired up to see the Wolves in action. There's so many great games there. College basketball season, NHL, and college football bowl season is going strong. So just visit FanDuel.com today to join, and you can get in on the action. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Alrighty, keeping this episode rolling on. Massive and really just crushing news that just made you, I'm sure when all of you read it, you were just like me going, this sucks. And that is the departure of Keanu Tanavasa, who originally a few weeks ago tweeted out, a Utah man am I, kind of doing what we saw, same thing with Cameron Calhoun, where he locked in his commitment. We felt good about Tanuvasa staying. He'd even kind of reaffirmed like his surprise to Calhoun's departure, and like, by doing so, like saying like, I'm surprised he left, made it seem like he was going to stay. But unfortunately, that's not the case, and he will be entering the transfer portal today. Steve Bartle of KSL Sports did a really good job reporting on all of this, and you can check out his article at kslsports.com. Here is what he read here's what he had in his article about what he heard happened in Tanuvasa's departure. This comes to us from KSL Sports. According to a source, there was zero indication this was imminent, yet his decision to enter the portal is likely fueled by the market for defensive linemen. Though he just entered the portal, sources have indicated that the two teams will be at or near the top of the list for him, USC and Michigan. The BYU Cougars, among others, are currently involved, but the Trojans and Wolverines are believed to be the other top options. So here we are again, a player from Utah's roster. We just did this with Cameron Calhoun. I mean, it really is unfortunate. You have a player from Utah's roster who commits to staying. And it's been a couple weeks even. Calhoun was days and Tanavasa was weeks. Everything seems fine. And then all of a sudden something changes and he enters the transfer portal. I wonder what that could be. There's only one thing really, at least in the way I look at it. Yes, things could happen behind the scenes that we aren't aware of. But I have a really hard time believing this is an NIL, especially when you see quotes like the one in the article that, once again, Steve Bartle wrote on KSL Sports, where it said his decision to enter the portal, because it was shocking, is likely fueled by the market for defensive linemen. And then you see two teams who we know have NIL war chests. USC has routinely outbid Utah for recruits as of late, and Michigan just paid how much money to get Bryce Underwood, the quarterback? I think it's like $10 million over 4 years or whatever it is. So the fact that USC and Michigan are in there, this seems absolutely NIL related. It's incredibly disappointing and frustrating, once again, that this is what's happened to Utah, but this is the world that we are in of college football right now. The best schools are going to continue to pry the best players from the non-SEC and Big Ten schools. And even the SEC schools. I mean, we see Alabama's AD last week. We talked about this. He's even like, we need to step up because we have players from our rosters who are leaving. Caleb Downs is safety at Alabama. Now he's crushing it at Ohio State. So this is this kind of stuff that happens in today's world of the portal. So really disappointing and tough to lose Tanuvasa. This is the biggest loss that Utah has suffered so far in the portal for me. Originally it was Cameron Calhoun. But what's the difference between the Cameron Calhoun loss and the Tanuvasa loss? Well, with Calhoun, it was like, okay, you got Kenan Johnson still coming back. You got Elijah Davis. You got Smith Snow. It's a massive loss, but there are logical players to fill in there. If you were to say to me, who's one of the best players, who might be the best player on this Utah defense next year, I might have gone Keanu Tanavasa. Teo Johnson's up there. Lander Barton's up there. Cameron Calhoun would have been up there, and Smith Snowden obviously still up there. But the departure of Tanuvasa is devastating. He was a game changer at the defensive tackle spot for Utah. He wasn't always able to stay healthy this last year, but when he was out there, there was a noticeable difference in Utah's defense. I think about games like the BYU game. He was incredibly effective against TCU, Arizona, Oklahoma State, just so disruptive inside. The 6'4" sophomore, 301 pounds. If you look at what he did over the course of his Utah career, 2 sacks last year, just 1 this year, only had 1 in 22 as well too. But yeah, he was limited a little bit due to injuries this year, but he's a beast inside. His quickness was elite. He also has four passes deflected too. So just did a great job of creating and causing havoc on the interior. And those stats don't tell the story, as they often don't with defensive tackles, because they're asked to do different things, eat up the double teams. And he was Utah's best pass rusher as a defensive tackle, in my opinion. He would often do a good job of using just his quickness to get past an offensive lineman on the interior, used his hands very well. Strong, took on double teams, just a guy who was constantly blowing up and messing up plays and allowing the linebackers to look good. So this is a devastating loss. And we'll talk about the other defensive tackles that Utah is going to use to try and replace Tanuvasa. But I am very concerned right now with the state of the Utah defensive tackle room. And Utah's lost key defensive tackles in the past, but Utah has now lost in one offseason Samote Pepa, Junior Tafuna, who graduates. Pepa went to Washington, and now Tanuvasa's in the portal. That's hard to lose your top three contributors there. Now, Utah has some guys that are going to be coming back next year. I think this portal stuff, and I shouldn't just say portal, this eligibility stuff with COVID still playing a role can be very complicated. So here are the guys that I'm looking at right now, like, okay, I think this is going to be used filling in for Utah. One of those guys is Liki Vaimahi. He is a guy who's been a steady, you probably remember that name because he's constantly been a steady presence along this Utah defensive line. I think he has a little bit of eligibility left. He didn't play in 2020, so red shirt there, but since he was on the team, I think he gets a COVID year. So played in 10 games in 21, 14 games in 22, 12 games in 23, and just 4 games with 2 starts in 24. So if he only those 4 games, and he already should, if it's 4 games, he should also get a medical redshirt. So use the redshirt that first year, COVID year plus a medical redshirt. He might be able to come back. Now the question will be, does he declare for the draft? I don't know where his draft stock would fall. I imagine he would come back, but it's up in the air. But he's a 6'4", 305-pound defensive tackle, several starting experience. He was, when Utah was fully healthy this year, he was their 3rd defensive tackle. He's a little bit ahead of Pepa in terms of playing time and effectiveness. I think Pepa's ceiling was higher, like 2022. Samote Pepa, we never saw him reach that level. So Vaimahi is the best defensive tackle Utah has in that room right now. So hopefully he returns because they really need him on the inside. The other one I'm really excited about for next year is Dallas Vakalaki. Dallas is a guy, 6'2", 291 pounds, just as a freshman. He played in 9 games. I mean, you're talking about a dude who could just ruin an offense in stretches on the interior. This is a cool stat from the Utah Athletics website. He led true freshmen on the team with 16 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and 5.5 third down stops, which they also do a good job of tracking in here. So he is a guy who could blow up plays on the interior, did a good job of shedding blockers and taking them onto. With what he was able to do as a freshman, I feel good about him starting next year, but it's still a lot to have to depend on a guy we saw in a limited role as a freshman. So Dallas and Vaimahi are probably the 2 starters at the D tackle spot for Utah. One other interesting name to keep in mind, I think David Fotu still has eligibility left with Utah. The 6'5", 303-pound defensive tackle senior only played in 3 games this past year. And if you look at his career, he played football in 2019 at Snow College, but the Diego Pavia rule did just become official. So if you played a junior college season, you do get an extra year of eligibility at the FBS level. So he didn't play in 21 or 22. So redshirt COVID. I don't know how if he gets a COVID, how that all works, honestly. But either way, he's in getting the junior college season back. He's only played 2 years. He should at least have 1 more year left. So hopefully Utah can get David Fotu back too, because when he was on the field at times in the past, especially during that 23 season where he played in 11 games, made 2 starts, he was very effective. So those are the 3 defensive tackles I look at right now. Like, okay, I feel good about them. Now outside of that, Utah's got some freshmen coming up. They have some other recruits that are on the roster that hopefully they could grow and blossom, but it's tough that the top 3 in terms of just most played, like I said, Vaimahi maybe a little better than Pepa, but the top 3 guys in most played for defensive tackle for Utah last year aren't coming back in 25. So yes, I am concerned about the defensive tackle room right now. I think guys like Dallas and Vaimahi can step up if Vaimahi does return, but there's questions about Vaimahi and Fotu. Are they coming back? The only one that we feel good about is Dallas Vakalaki, but he was a true freshman. So yeah, the Tanavasa departure really hurts. I think he was going to be one of the best defensive tackles in the Big 12 had he stayed healthy. He's going to go in right away and be an instant impact guy at Michigan or USC to me. A great player in person. I had an opportunity to interact with him a couple times. Always really liked him. And today's NIL era, if this is what it seemed like, he was offered more money. with Calhoun, I think we even heard it was as much as like double at times. Like, I'm not going to be mad at him at all for choosing to go elsewhere. I understand why fans are frustrated, especially because he did tweet out a Utah man am I. But look, when you're offered that kind of money, which it seems like he was, I don't blame a guy for leaving. So really sucks to see Tanavasa go. Was a guy who embodied what it meant to be a Utah man. And is someone I'll still remember as a Utah man fondly for what he contributed over the past few seasons. But a big loss for Utah, losing out on an elite defensive tackle like Keanu Tanavasa. Still stings and hurts. But that wasn't the last departure that Utah had. They had lost a running back last week. I want to talk about 4-star Mike Mitchell leaving and just being the latest of Utah's running back room, which is now completely new to depart. We'll be talking about his departure in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is focused on togetherness this holiday season. That means when you bring people together at live events, the experience is that much better, meaning it's the perfect gift. Game Time has a new feature called Game Picks that makes getting tickets for live events even easier. Game Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. There are so many fantastic deals I love and features about Game Time. I mean, it's not even just for sports, right? You can get it for concert, comedy, and theater events. It's also an all-in pricing, which shows you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. And there's also that low price guarantee, which I love, where Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So you get a view from your seats, so you know what kind of a deal you're getting. You also don't have those surprise fees. Those drive me nuts. And low price guarantee. How about the most flexible customer service policy in the ticket industry with Game Time ticket coverage? Game Time's got your back. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, capital L for locked, O for on, and all the word college is capitalized for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Appreciate all of you as well for tuning in on this Christmas Eve episode of us. Happy December 24th for everyone. Christmas Eve episode of Locked On Utes. Got my little Christmas hat, trying to be a little festive. I think I will have an episode coming out on the 25th tomorrow. We're going to try not to make it as long, as I'm sure you all have busy Christmas plans, but there's so much going on right now at this university. It's hard to miss a show at the moment. And speaking of just the news and how constant it always is, also, we do have a fun Locked On Big 12 squad special coming out, so I encourage you guys to check that out if you got some time. Always fun getting on with the guys. And if you think this hat is a little crazy, which it is a Utah Utes Christmas hat, I have a even wilder outfit on in that one. Last transfer we got to talk about, Mike Mitchell left. So Mike Mitchell, 4-star running back, was really the backup running back for Utah last year. 47 carries, 158 yards for a touchdown. Mekhi Bernard was so clearly the best running back on Utah's roster that they very rarely operated without him. But Mike Mitchell did get some opportunity, especially in a game like the one against Utah State, right, where he had 14 carries, 75 yards in that game, averaged 5.4 yards per carry. But outside of that game, never had more than 9 carries in a game, with that one being the exception. He had 8 carries against Oklahoma State, only had 9 yards, but still he was a freshman, wasn't a true freshman, redshirt the year before, but a freshman. So, Bernard was the best back that Utah had. Like we said, you saw the field a little better, a little more explosive, a little tougher, just more experienced. Mitchell did some good things, and I was excited to see what he was going to do in 2025. I felt like I didn't feel like, and I think Utah agreed, like he shouldn't be the guy in the backfield, but bring in some competition for him. And if he wins that job, hey, good for him. And either way, I felt good about him being the number 2 back with what he showed in just his first year playing. Now they got that game experience, continuing to grow and learn. So I was excited for what Mike Mitchell could do. But unfortunately, we won't get to see that in Salt Lake City because he also entered the transfer portal, meaning that 2023 running back group that Utah brought in, John Randall, 4-star, Dejon Stanley, 4-star, Mike Mitchell, 4-star, all left. That's crazy when you're talking about, this is what we always talk about with recruiting on Locked On Utes. It's like when Utah lands a high school recruit, we should be fired up excited because the player could pan out. But in today's world, nothing is guaranteed, not only in terms of the player not always hitting their ceiling, but now especially not transferring, or like a Hunter Clegg doesn't end up even coming to Salt Lake City because he goes on his mission. So it's a wild world covering college football right now. And it's also just like, you don't count your chickens before they hatch, right? So don't be like, oh, Utah backfield set for years to come, because all 3 of those guys are now out. Mitchell's a loss for Utah. I think he's a really good player. I think he's got a chance to become a special back somewhere else, but Utah will be okay because of what the transfer portal is right now. Like, you have a chance to just regroup each year. Wayshawn Parker is the best back that Utah has. Could Mitchell have beat out Rodgers for the number 2 back? Maybe, but Rodgers is way more experienced and is coming off a season in which he just had over 70 carries, over 300 yards, averaged 5 yards per carry. That's better than what Mike Mitchell averaged. Mike Mitchell only averaged 3.4 yards per carry. So I feel better about who Utah's is our RB2 too. Could he have been better than Devin Green? Possibly, probably. He's higher ceiling, but we haven't seen it yet. So this is where anytime Utah loses out a recruit, it'll be disappointing, but it's not. The reason the Hunter Clegg one was a bigger deal to me is because it's who you lost him to. He chose your rival, BYU, and in-state recruiting is everything. Mike Mitchell's loss is like, it hurts, but we already have guys in that room that can fill that void, which I do not feel as strongly about Utah's defensive end room, even though they did just get a defensive end from Washington, who I do like and think is going to be a good player. And there's a lot of other good players that Utah's landed through the portal that we haven't had a chance to discuss yet. Wide receiver they added from New Mexico, quarterback from Oklahoma, who could potentially be QB2 next season. Those are things we'll have to cover on a future episode of Locked On Utes. But yeah, hate seeing Mike Mitchell go. Like the player, got a chance to actually play basketball with him back during my days just playing at the rec, and was always a good guy up there too. So really enjoyed interacting with Mike Mitchell. I think he's going to end up being a pretty good back, but Utah will be okay. I think of college football as year to year now in terms of positional and team needs because of what is going on with the transfer portal. You want to have some good recruits lined up, of course, and Utah did just flip a 4-star back or 3 4-star wherever from Ole Miss. So you feel okay about the future, even like, okay, we got at least a guy for the future as well as all these backs they added through the portal. So I think Utah will be okay, but still hate seeing Mitchell go because he's a guy who has good potential. So what do you guys think of the Mitchell loss? What do you think of Keanu Tanavasa leaving too? And how do you feel about Utah landing Wayshawn Parker? I wanted to start with the positive news today, since yesterday we started with the more negative news of Utah losing out on Hunter Clegg. Got a little bit of Christmas positivity, at least trying to, because seeing Tanuvasa left a big lump of coal in the stocking to wake up to that news this morning. So that's going to do it for today's Locked On Utes. Try and be back tomorrow talking more things Utah athletics, breaking down the latest. Hope you'll see us then, and hope you all have a Merry, Merry Christmas if I don't get the chance to talk to you that before then as well. Have a great one, everyone. Thank you for listening to Locked On Utes.